Thanks everyone for joining. Today we're going to deep dive consent and what that means for the network. So um, consent is something that is stored inside of just inside of your local database. So if you kind of remember some of my previous talks, I kind of touched on this. So you have, app A and app B, and each of these have a local database. That's not, the network. The network has some stuff up here. This is the network. And inside this local database is your messages, your after they've been decrypted, and also there's a table in here that has your consent records. And this is per installation. And if you remember the history sync call that I did, that the way that you get these between your two installations is with history sync. But we're not going to talk about that right now. That's just how these stay in sync is the history sync, which syncs when you call conversation sync all. Sync all. So you have a record of consent in this database, and you have a record of consent in this database. For all intents and purposes, they're the same, and that's where they're stored. So what is stored in this consent database? So this database has 3 different types. So it can either be a group, or actually we'll call it, I think it's a conversation. It can be a conversation ID, a inbox ID, or an address. And then it can have 3 different states. It can be denied, approved, or unknown. And then it actually unknown. There's no T on the end of unknown. And then it can actually, and then the actual value. So like this would be like 0x000 or whatever. So it has 3 different fields in the database, and it can be one of these 3 things. So the way you can think about this is I, have a conversation in here. Let's say it's like, some spammer, and they're talking to me in a DM. I can say, I would like to block this spammer. And so I can, or deny them access to my inbox. So I can, say conversation ID spammer is denied. But let's say my family has a group chat, and I want to make sure that that shows up in my inbox. I can say, family conversation ID is approved. And this is how you can get, different conversations having different states. By default, every conversation has a consent state of unknown, which pretty much says that you haven't said that you want this conversation, and you haven't said that you don't want to see this conversation. And so that's kind of the default, and that is how, you might see one way of displaying this is you have a request tab, and the request tab has all your unknown conversations, or you might have, your inbox, and this has all your approved, and then, your denied ones are just, often land over here not doing anything, because you never wanted to see those anyways. The good news is that each record in the database is just one record. So this conversation ID is denied, but let's say that was an accident. You actually do want this person. They're not a spammer. You thought they were, but they're not. You can actually change this to approved at any time, and it will move it back into your inbox. And so it's just like a way of kind of organizing your conversations. The one really important thing to note here is that when you deny a conversation, it does not remove you from the conversation. So you are still a participant in this conversation. The person that you're talking to has no idea that you have moved this conversation into a land where you no longer see it. It's still going to be receiving messages into your local database and getting decrypted, and you still show as a member of this conversation. So just to note that denying it does not actually remove you from the conversation. That would be like a self-removal or asking somebody to remove you from the group. So let's talk a little bit more about some of these other things like inbox ID and address and when you might want to use those. So you have somebody who's talking in a group chat, your family has a bunch of people and maybe there's somebody in this family group chat that you really triggers you and you don't want to see their messages. That's person A. So you can say, I just want to block this inbox ID. So inbox ID B, and let's just say they're denied. It's up to the app to handle this, but one way is that you could have messages, and if the message is from inbox ID A or B, we denied B. If it's by inbox ID B, you could just say, hide messages from inbox ID B, for this user so that they can't see them. If inbox ID B is denied, we also have a few other functions in our SDKs that can help with this. We have one that says, so a conversation and a group actually has a created, actually this is mostly on group, by inbox ID. And it also has a added by inbox ID. So you can say, like, if you got added to a group, you can say, was the person who added me to this group somebody I already don't want talking to me? Is the person that created this group somebody I already don't want talking to me? So there's like a couple of extra like fine-tuning things here for dealing with consent and making sure that the things that you're getting in your inbox are actually things that you want in your inbox and aren't, just somebody that you really don't want to talk to continuing to try to reach you in different formats. Maybe they can't reach you in a DM because you have them blocked, but now they just start creating group chats and adding you to them. So the other things that we give you in the SDK is on sync all and on list conversations. We give you the ability to filter by consent state. And right now we give you the ability to filter by an array of consent states. So let's say your app has an inbox and a request tab, and you want to just show the approved in the inbox. So you can just call list approved, and that will just give you the approved inbox, the approved conversations in your inbox. So you're not spending time listing all of them and then filtering on just the approved ones. You can give this an array, like if you want to do approved and unknown, that way you can make the request tab in the inbox at the same time, or, whichever. This also works for sync all. Since sync all is as we said in a different call, is like pretty expensive. It's nice to be able to just say, I don't actually want to ever sync my denied conversations. Like, why would I be spending resources adding those into my local database? I just want to get new messages for the things that I actually care about, or the ones that I don't know if I care about yet. Unknown. So we give you a couple of levers here to filter those. And yeah, I think that's the bulk of it. We also give you a sync consent, which actually also gets synced on sync all. So you don't have to call it directly, but let's say you just want to sync your consent, you can call that. And we also give you a stream consent. Since this is working with this history sync, we give you a stream that can stream the consent records so that like, hey, app B blocked denied someone. Let's update that in app A as well. So the stream consent will let you know if one of your other installations have done something. And that's important, right? Because streaming like in the traditional sense from our actual, network works a little bit differently than streaming from the history sync, seeing as, when you deny someone or you approve someone, the only person who really cares about that is your other installations. And so this is the stream to listen for those. Okay, does anybody have questions on that? Did I cover everything? Did I miss anything? I see you raising your hand, Mustaba.
Yeah, thank you. Um, about the consent sync. So let's assume that you have a new client in your new installation, and you have tons of spam conversation. If we don't call consent sync, that means that you're gonna pull down everything, even the spammers conversations, right?
So the question, I'm just going to repeat the question so I think I understand it. So you have app A and app B, and they have a bunch of things that are denied, and they have a bunch of things in request, and they have a bunch of things in approved. And then you decide to log into app C. And on
Right.
initial login of app C,
Mhm.
how does the inbox update immediately and with the new conversations so that you don't see everything as unknown?
Yep. Because yeah, which function we call first? Sync consent or like getting the welcome messages and messages?
So this is, I think I covered this in the history sync. So when you first create a client for the first time, a new installation, there's like a dance that happens between sync all and requires you to open a, an existing installation. So you would trigger a sync all. It would put out a request to the history sync server. You would open app B. App B would call sync all. It would then say, "Oh, look, there's a message inside of my sync group," right? If you guys remember the sync group from my last call, um, there's a message inside of sync group that said that somebody is looking for consent records. So I'm going to send those up to that server. So then it like sends it up to the server, and then I'm going to post a message that says it's ready. And then you come back into app C. So it's like a dance. You're like app C, app A, app B, app C. And then app C's like sync all, sync group can now see that it has a message that says it's ready, and then it pulls them down. So, sorry, that's just a recap of how the history syncing works. Um, the question is, if can you get conversations in your inbox before this dance? And the answer is no, because you need this dance to happen to get the conversations in your inbox to begin with. Um, So for the conversations to even show up, this dance has to happen. So unless it does the 30-minute timeout, which maybe we can maybe we can discuss that, but for this dance to happen, then the consent record should come with it. And at least that's how I understand it.
Thank you. And about you covered if we block or deny someone inbox ID, someone that was perfect, clear about the conversations. When we deny a conversation, does that affect the creator's inbox ID or only that conversation?
Yeah, so I guess I didn't even that's a great question. So there is a little bit of implicit consent that happens inside of the network, which is good to note on. If you send a message, so so say you open your request tab and you see a conversation in there, and the app that you're using doesn't allow you to approve or deny, but you say, "Oh, hey, good to see you." You send a message. That on the network is considered implicit consent. And so we say if you send a message in a group into a conversation, you are implicitly approving that. And so we actually on the back end will flip your consent state for this conversation to approved. And we also do that if you create the group or the conversation. So if you create a conversation with 0x whatever, you are saying that you want this conversation. So it defaults to approved if you're the person creating it. So the only time that you'll get unknown conversations in here is if somebody else is creating a group with you. Um, and the network doesn't do anything else implicitly. We do, however, do something implicitly with addresses. So if you block an address, we will also block the associated inbox ID. So there is a little bit of linking between addresses and inbox IDs that we do in the network to make that a little bit easier for you to say, if you don't want to talk to this address, we also deny the inbox ID. Since like a bunch of addresses can be associated with one inbox ID, we don't want, since you send a message and the sender is an inbox ID, we don't want, you blocking an address, but still seeing those person's messages because they're actually associated with an inbox ID. I feel like there's probably a world where we deprecate address-based consent and we just encourage people to block based on inbox ID, but that's another conversation. Did that answer your question? I feel like I
Yes,
answered a
thank
different
you.
question, maybe. Okay. Yeah, I think that another interesting little pitfall here that is good to note is that, a DM, in the classic sense, a DM is between, A and B, and they both have an inbox ID. And you would say, I want to block B. I don't want them to reach me. The conversation also has a conversation ID. So there's like two layers here where it's like, well, maybe you want to block B and you want to block this conversation ID. Like sometimes it might be easier for a UI to just do it at the conversation ID level. This is maybe something to take back, but to the protocols, like if I block inbox ID B, I probably also want to block the DM associated with it, and vice versa. But yeah, you probably want to, just so you get the benefits of listing and syncing, listing and filtering by unknown and approved, everything has to be approved and denied at the conversation ID. And that's just a flag. It's like in V2, like you could block people from the address ID and that would block the whole conversation. But actually in V3, you want to block them at the conversation ID so you get these benefits for syncing and listing. Because if you block them just at the inbox ID, there's mostly that's for handling, hiding messages in a conversation. Yes, you could handle that also at the conversation level, but you probably also want to block that conversation ID.
Do you mind if I just rephrase that just to see if I understand properly? So it sounds like it could be something that we want to revisit, whether we want to link like inbox IDs to DM conversation IDs kind of like implicitly, so that if you set one of them to denied, it sets the other one as well. Kind of similarly to how we implicitly link an inbox ID to an address. That's could be a potential improvement, but right now we're like a little bit less opinionated about that, and the developer would need to do that themselves.
Yeah, we're less opinionated because, and maybe this is a wrong assumption, is that, maybe I want to talk to Cameron one-on-one, and so I want to keep our DM open, but maybe I don't want to see Cameron's messages in a group chat. Like maybe I'm in a really big group chat and the way that he talks in that group chat, I don't really want to see. And so you could say like blocking at the inbox ID hides his messages from a group chat, but I could still keep our conversation open. I don't know if that's even a use case anybody would want. It's probably more likely we would want to link it, but.
I think the one other question I have, if I may, is maybe to talk in terms of like failure modes. So I guess it might just tie back to the history sync conversation, but it might also just be worth just mentioning like what is the case where you could set something and then another app might not get the consent record, just to state that it's not totally impossible that the system breaks down, but maybe we could just talk about like what are the conditions that would cause it to happen.
Yeah. I guess so if you remember the conversation I talked about with client creation, so on create, you set a history sync URL, or a history URL or whatever it's called. And by default, it's set to one that Ephemera hosts, but you could point it to any. One failure scenario would be if this history sync, this history server is down. Like for some reason, the history server is down, the one that you specified on create. If the history server is like, under maintenance or down, it's possible that you could set a consent record and it would try to hit this server and it would not be able to. And then this app, you would get on app B and you would still see this conversation here. So it is really dependent on this history sync server working to be able to communicate between these two. Another scenario is if an app doesn't, call sync consent or sync all, and the consent isn't fetched from the other app. I guess this is probably a question for Dakota. Like, if I'm on app A and I block someone, does that send off an immediate like, does this loop have to happen every single time? Or if app C blocks, can app B get it immediately? It doesn't have to reopen app C.
No, it shouldn't have to.
That's this. Okay. So app A blocks, it sends a message and app B can get it immediately. Okay. And that's because the message doesn't need to go to the history server and it's just in the sync group.
Right. Those are just fired off as individual messages as a special message type.
Okay. So why is the history server involved at that level? It's just for the initial one.
Right. That initial sync would be too large to send as a message through MLS. Perfect.
Okay. So in that scenario, just to clarify what I just said, is if we remember the sync group has messages in it, the consent updates come in as individual messages. So it actually doesn't require the server at all. The server is only required on the initial login of AppC. So just double clicking on that, individual consent updates get passed as messages on the sync group. It still requires you to call sync all to sync this sync group. But that's how you can just get it immediately between the two without involving the history server. The history server is only involved on the initial login.